Hi everyone, my name is Bianca Green, and today I will be discussing the Supreme Court case, the Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus the City of Hialeah, Florida, which was decided in 1993. And this case primarily focused on religious freedom under the First Amendment and asked whether a city can prohibit a religious practice because many citizens found it offensive or disagree with it. And the case became one of the most important free exercise clause decisions in modern constitutional law. A little overview of the case. This case arose when a Santeria church attempted to establish a place of worship in Hialeah, Florida. And Santeria is a religion that includes animal sacrifice as an important religious practice. And when city officials learned of the church's plans, they passed several ordinances restricting animal sacrifice. The church argued that these laws violated its First Amendment right to freely practice its religion, and the Supreme Court was asked to ultimately determine whether the city's actions were constitutional or not. The parties in this case are the petitioners, who were the church and its leader, Ernesto Picardo. They brought the lawsuit because they believed that their constitutional rights were violated. The respondent was the city of Hialeah, Florida, and the city defended its ordinances by arguing that they were designed to protect public health and prevent animal cruelty. And ultimately, the Supreme Court had to decide whether the city's explanations were legitimate or whether the laws were actually targeting a religious group. A little background on what the religion of Santeria really is. It originated in Cuba and developed there among enslaved Africans from the Yoruba people. And Santeria is a blend of Catholicism and African beliefs, and its followers believe in spiritual beings which are called orishas, and they perform rituals to honor them. One of their most important practices in Santeria is animal sacrifice, and the sacrificed animals are usually later cooked and eaten, so they don't usually go to waste except during certain ceremonies. So some facts about the case is in 1987, the church leased some property in Hialeah and announced its plans to establish a church, school, cultural center, and museum. But many residents of Hialeah objected after learning about the religion's animal sacrifice and that they would be performing the animal sacrifices there. And pretty soon, the city council quickly held emergency meetings, and they adopted several ordinances which were aimed at restricting the rituals and sacrifice. Although at first glance the laws appeared neutral, but they seem to have been passed immediately after the church announced their plans, which ended up being a deciding fact in the case. The city claimed that these laws were designed to protect their public's health and prevent cruelty to any animals. However, many other forms of animal killing remained legal. People could still hunt, fish, exterminate pests, and slaughter animals for food. The church argued that the city was not really concerned with the animal deaths generally. Instead, it was specifically targeting religious animal sacrifice while allowing many similar activities for non-religious reasons. The legal issue in the case. The central legal question was whether the city's ordinances violated the free exercise clause of the First Amendment, and the Supreme Court examines whether laws affecting religion are neutral and generally applicable. A neutral law treats religious and non-religious conduct equally. A generally applicable law applies broadly rather than targeting a specific religion. And if a law fails these requirements, it faces strict scrutiny. Some arguments that were made by the church were that they argued that animal sacrifice was not just a minor tradition for them, but one of the most important parts of Santeria worship, and banning it greatly interfered with their ability to practice their faith. The church also argued that the city was not treating all animal killings equally. Hunting, fishing, slaughterhouses, pest control, and other activities involving animal deaths remained legal, and this suggested that the city was not truly concerned about animal deaths in general. Instead, it appeared to be targeting a specific religious practice, and the church believed that the First Amendment protects minority religions just as strongly as major religions, so therefore the city could not single out Santeria simply because some residents disliked or misunderstood its practices. Some arguments made by the city of Hialeah were that they argued that its ordinances were not intended to discriminate against religion. Instead, they claimed that they were attempting to protect public health and safety. The city expressed concerns that the sacrificed animals might not be inspected for disease, and that the animal remains could create sanitation issues if disposed of improperly. Officials also argued that the animal sacrifice was cruel and that the city had a legitimate interest in protecting animals from unnecessary suffering. And finally, the city also maintained that restricting animal slaughter to specific areas was necessary for public welfare and proper regulation. The Supreme Court ultimately ended up ruling in favor of the Church of Lukumi. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote that the city of Hialeah's ordinances were not neutral because they did specifically target Santeria practices, and the court examined the language of the city's laws, the timing of their passing, and other evidence that was gathered which showed hostility toward the religion rather than a genuine effort to protect public welfare. One interesting aspect of this case is that the Supreme Court ruled unanimously 9-0 in favor of the church. This meant that all 9 justices agreed with the outcome, which is rare in a Supreme Court case. The court found substantial evidence that the city officials were motivated by hostility toward the religion. Some evidence showed that during public meetings, several officials made comments criticizing the religion itself rather than focusing only on public health concerns. The court also found that the ordinances were written in a way that prohibited religious animal sacrifice while still allowing many similar non-religious activities. Because the evidence of unequal treatment was so strong, justices from different ideological perspectives agreed that the city's actions violated the Free Exercise Clause. This unanimous decision demonstrated how seriously the court viewed government discrimination against religious practices. The city of Hialeah faced strict scrutiny after the case because their laws were not neutral, and the court applied strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of constitutional review. And under the strict scrutiny, the government must show a compelling reason for restricting a constitutional right and must use the least restrictive method possible. The court concluded that Hialeah failed this test. Even if the city had legitimate concerns about health and animal welfare, it could have addressed those concerns through broader regulations rather than targeting a specific religion. After learning all about this case and going through all the research, I agree with the Supreme Court's decision, and one reason why is that the constitutional right should protect all religions, not just popular ones. That's why we have our constitutional rights, is so people can freely practice their religion. And the government should not be allowed to single out a religious group simply because its practices make some people uncomfortable. And the city allowed many other forms of animal killings but prohibited religious sacrifice. That unequal treatment shows discrimination to me, and the First Amendment existed to prevent government hostility toward religious beliefs and practices. One comparison case that I found and that I thought was useful was the Employment Division versus Smith in 1990. And in Smith, the Native Americans were denied unemployment benefits after using peyote during a religious ceremony, and the Supreme Court ruled against them because the law prohibiting peyote was neutral and applied to everyone equally. But in Lukumi, the court reached the opposite result because Hialeah ordinance specifically targeted religious conduct, and the comparison shows that the court treats neutral laws differently from laws aimed at a particular religion. The significance of this case is that the Lukumi decision remains one of the most important religious freedom cases in American constitutional law. Legal scholars frequently cite the case because it established that government cannot target religious practices for special restrictions. The decision strengthened protections for minority religions and reinforced the requirement that laws affecting religion must be neutral and generally applicable. The case continues to influence modern disputes involving religious liberty, including cases involving religious accommodations, public health regulations, and government treatment of religious organizations. According to constitutional scholars, Lukumi is considered one of the strongest examples of the Supreme Court protecting minority religions from discrimination. Many legal experts argue that the decision helped clarify that government officials cannot hide religious discrimination behind laws that appear neutral on the surface. So in conclusion, the Church of the Lukumi Babalu I versus the City of Hialeah established that government may not single out a religious practice for unfavorable treatment. The Supreme Court ruled that Hialeah's ordinances violated the Free Exercise Clause because they targeted the Santeria religion rather than applying equally to everyone. And this case reminds us that religious freedom protects both majority and minority faith and remains a fundamental constitutional right. Thank you for listening.